Well, the NBA canceling press conferences and media availability for the remainder of its China tour. Our chief breaking news correspondent Trace Gallagher has more on the deepening controversy. Good evening, Trace.
Shannon, good evening. First, the NBA tried to shut down all questions about China during a post-game news conference, but in doing so, the league got tremendous pushback, including numerous social media posts calling it pathetic. So now the NBA is going silent altogether, meaning there will be no news conferences for players or coaches either before or after this weekend's game in Shenzhen between the LA Lakers and Brooklyn Nets. The league says it would put the players and coaches in an unfair situation, and one ESPN analyst agreed. Watch.
I would not advise any player to speak out on that issue. And, we get into this thing, freedom of speech, but with freedom of speech are repercussions.
Like losing money. Even the wildly outspoken Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban, who consistently rants about everything from NBA refs to President Trump, is staying mum when it comes to the China controversy. Cuban has seen the financial damage the story has caused to the league and his franchise and decided to defer all comments to the NBA commissioner. But Golden State Warriors coach Steve Kerr, who was uncharacteristically silent, is apparently getting his voice back, saying, why would he talk about China's human rights abuses when the Chinese don't ask about our human rights abuses? And here's more. Watch.
But people in China didn't ask me about people owning AR-15s and mowing each other down in a mall. I wasn't asked that question.
So what about the accusation that critics of the NBA are hypocrites in this case? Here's former NBA star Charles Barkley.
The players and the owners both got billions of dollars at stake. The thing is really funny. All these idiots and jack on radio and television talking about these players should do that. These are the same people who've been hating on Colin Kaepernick for the last few years. Y'all want to control what happens in a foreign country? Give me a break.
All right, let's turn to Fox News contributor and former ESPN reporter Britt McHenry and New York Times bestselling author Eric Metaxas. By the way, his new book is a children's book, Donald Builds the Wall. Great to have you both with us. There it is. There's the book.
It's Donald Drains the Swamp, but that was close.
Well, this one's Donald Drains the Swamp. He's got two fantastic books, so there you go.
Yes,
you can't even keep them straight.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, let's get back to the issue at hand, which is the NBA. You heard what Charles Barkley said there. He used a word that I cannot use, but he said basically the people who are calling out these players are Jack A's, as we would call them in my house. And Britt, he said these are the same people who got all over Colin Kaepernick for being political, and now they want these players to get political.
Yeah, I think initially when this story broke, Shannon, I took a step back because of the financial interests that were discussed in the stories ahead of us. 500 million people total probably consuming NBA services, products, everything. A streaming app that's worth $1.5 billion. So I was like understanding more than I think some more right-wing people would be. So Charles Barkley has a bit of a point, but it's because they're so insistent on this woke policy and American rights, where you look at them and you say, Steph Curry, how can you sit in front of cameras and say, I don't know much about China, when you're a former MVP, you went to Davidson, you're an intelligent human being, and you're literally having training camp with the NBA in a city where there's concentration camps with more than 1 million people in northern China. There's humanitarian violations happening in China that are much more severe than America. So when Steve Kerr tries to compare the two, I think anyone with a pulse and a brain is like, this is hypocritical.
Okay, let me play a little bit, just a snippet of what he had to say, and then we'll talk about it.
People in China didn't ask me about, people owning AR-15s and mowing each other down in a mall.
A moral equivalency argument it sounds like he's trying to make there, Eric.
He's out of his skull. And I say that in love. For somebody to make that comparison, you have to say this. I would say that I hope he's simply ignorant, because for somebody to compare what goes on in this country with what goes on in China, I have to say, if you could make a lot of money in Nazi Germany and there's Jews being tortured and killed, and you say, well, you know what, we got problems in America too. We have Jim Crow laws, so shut up. I'm going to make my money in Germany. You have to at some point make a judgment. And for somebody to sloppily, and what Charles Barkley said is equally ridiculous, what Colin Kaepernick is doing and what he's protesting cannot begin to compare to what is happening in China. There are people in China suffering the horrors of the damned right now while we talk about it on TV. if you have freedom in America and you don't use your voice to speak up for people who are literally being tortured for their faith, being killed for the faith, we're talking about Uyghur Muslims, Buddhists, Falun Gong, and Christians, people are suffering horrors. We're not talking about they're being slightly persecuted. This is like Nazi Germany or the Soviet Gulag. At some point, you have to say, we don't have anything like that over here, and we have a voice of freedom. If we don't use that voice of freedom and say, forget about the money. There's a time to forget about the money. Otherwise, you're prostituting yourself and you effectively have no values except the bottom line. That is not America. We've never been that kind of a country, and I don't think we ever want to be that kind of a country.
Here's what Ben Shapiro said about it. He says, so what happened to all of the corporate do-gooderism? It simply disappeared upon contact with reality. That's the sad truth of corporate politics. If it takes kowtowing to the Chinese Communist government to earn a quick dollar, corporations will do it. Britt.
And we're seeing that. Look, when you have Ted Cruz and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez signing the same letter about how we've completely thrown freedom of speech out the window for consumerism, that's a bipartisan support to a problem. I think it's embarrassing what the NBA did, and I could not agree with you more. And you know what? In America, we don't forbid the number of children you can have. That was happening in China up till 2015. So it's embarrassing
and
to hear
they weren't
comparisons.
just forbidding the number.
Yes.
They were killing the children in the mother's womb against her will. That is what China has been. We in America have never been like that. And for us to say, hey, we've got problems and we're going to look away so we can make a buck, shame on you, corporate leaders. That is not the American way.
Eric, how do you really feel?
Well, I have to say there are a few things that are this black and white, and I am seriously shocked that they could have said those things.
Well, we'll see. They'll wrap up their time over there back here stateside. Maybe it'll be a different conversation.
Or at least decline comment and don't say things that are willfully ignorant. As we saw some of our stars, LeBron James, Steve Kerr, just step away.
All right, Britt and Eric, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Great to see you guys.